I walked home that afternoon feeling like the luckiest woman alive. My grandmother, the woman who wore the same three dresses for 20 years, had just left me $937,000. I bought roses for my husband. I could not wait to tell him the news. But when I reached my apartment door, I heard voices inside. My husband, his mother, and they were talking about me. What I heard next made my blood run cold. They already knew about the inheritance. They had been watching my grandmother's mail for months, and they had a plan. Get me to sign over everything. Take it all. And if I refused, well, accidents happen, do they not? Those were her exact words. His mother, planning my death like she was planning a dinner party. But here is the part that still gives me chills. This was not the first time they had done this. My husband had been married before. His first wife inherited money too. She died in a car accident 6 months later. I was next. What they did not know, my grandmother had warned me in a letter I was about to read. And everything I heard that day, I recorded every single word. Stay with me, because what happened next, you will not believe. And if you have ever trusted someone who turned out to be a stranger, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button so you do not miss what comes next. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever discovered someone's true colors when they thought you were not listening? Let us get into it. They say ignorance is bliss. I used to think that was just something people said to make themselves feel better about not knowing the truth. But standing outside my own apartment that Tuesday afternoon, hand frozen on the doorknob, I finally understood what those words really meant. My name is Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell. I am 32 years old, and I had been married to David James Crawford for 9 years. 9 years of shared meals, shared dreams, and shared struggles in a cramped two-bedroom rental apartment. 9 years of believing we were a team. I was wrong about all of it. That morning had started like any other. I woke up at 7, made coffee, and sat down at my computer to work on a graphic design project for a client. I worked from home as a freelance designer, something my mother-in-law, Patricia, constantly reminded me was not a real job. Around 10, my phone rang, an unfamiliar number. Good morning, a professional female voice said. This is Margaret Nelson from Nelson Law and Estates. Am I speaking with Sarah Mitchell? Yes, that is me. Miss Mitchell, I am calling regarding the estate of your grandmother, Ruth Ellen Hayes. You need to come to our office today if possible. There are documents that require your signature. I froze. My grandmother had passed away 4 months ago, back in February. The funeral had been small and quiet. Just me and a few neighbors from the rundown apartment complex where she had lived her entire life. Grandma Ruth had been a factory worker, retired on Social Security, and counted every single penny. She wore the same 3 dresses for 20 years and once yelled at me for throwing away a bread crust. What kind of documents? I asked. Grandma did not have anything to leave behind. I cannot discuss the details over the phone, Miss Mitchell. Can you come to our office at 2 this afternoon? I wrote down the address and hung up, completely confused. What could there possibly be to discuss? Grandma Ruth had nothing. She lived in a tiny room in a shared apartment. She saved for 2 years just to buy a new refrigerator, but I went anyway. And what I discovered in that attorney's office changed everything. Margaret Ruth Nelson was a woman in her mid-50s with sharp gray eyes and an even sharper business suit. She shook my hand firmly and invited me to sit across from her large oak desk. Miss Mitchell, she began, I understand this may come as a surprise. Your grandmother drafted a will 2 years ago. According to her last wishes, all of her assets passed to you. I almost laughed. The room in the shared apartment? That is very kind, but I do not think I need legal documents for that. Margaret smiled, the kind of smile that told me she had delivered this news before. Not just the room, she said. She opened a folder and began laying documents on the desk, one after another. I stared at the papers. Certificates of ownership, bank statements, property deeds. 3 condominiums, Margaret explained. One downtown valued at $285,000. One on the north side valued at $245,000. One on the west end valued at $195,000. Plus a cabin on 2 acres of lakefront property, property valued at $85,000. And a savings account containing $127,000. I could not breathe. I literally could not draw air into my lungs. I stammered. That is almost $1 million, 937,000 to be precise. But how? Grandma lived in poverty. She counted every penny. She wore clothes until they fell apart. Margaret leaned back in her chair. That is exactly how she accumulated this wealth, Miss Mitchell. Your grandmother started buying real estate in 1985. She bought her first property for $12,000 cash, money she had saved since she was 16 years old. Then she rented it out, saved that income, and bought another property. And another. She lived frugally so she could invest. For 40 years. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to reconcile the grandmother I knew, the one who made me split a sandwich because food should not go to waste, with a woman who secretly owned nearly $1 million in real estate. There is one more thing, Margaret said. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. Your grandmother asked me to give you this. She said you should read it after you learn about the inheritance. I took the envelope with trembling hands. On the front, in Grandma Ruth's shaky handwriting, were the words, "For Sarah." I opened it right there in the attorney's office. Inside were several handwritten pages, and as I read them, tears began streaming down my face. My dearest Sarah, the letter began. The handwriting was shaky. Grandma Ruth's arthritis had gotten worse in her final years. But every word was clear. Every sentence was deliberate. She had taken her time writing this letter. She had chosen every word with care. If you are reading this, I am no longer with you. Do not cry, sweetheart. I lived a long and full life, and I am at peace knowing I did everything I could to protect you. But I was already crying. Tears were streaming down my face, dripping onto the paper, smudging the ink. Margaret handed me a box of tissues without saying a word. She had seen this before. She knew what was coming. You are probably in shock right now. 3 condos, a cabin, money in the bank. You are wondering why I kept it secret, why I lived so modestly when I had all of this. I will tell you why. I did not want anyone to know too soon. People change when they smell money, Sarah. Even the people closest to you, especially the people closest to you. I have seen it happen too many times. Good marriages destroyed, loving families torn apart, children turning against parents, all because of money, all because of greed. So I kept my secret. I lived in my tiny room. I wore my old dresses. I counted my pennies and saved my bread crusts. And I watched. I watched everyone around you, Sarah. I watched and I waited, and I did not like what I saw. I have watched you over these years. I saw you get married, glowing with happiness. You were so beautiful that day, sweetheart. So full of hope, so full of dreams. But I also saw something else. I saw the way your mother-in-law looked at you during the ceremony. Not with joy, not with welcome, with calculation, like she was measuring you, like she was deciding whether you were useful. I kept my mouth shut. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself to give her a chance. But then I watched you change. I saw how you slowly faded, becoming quieter, smaller, less like yourself. The Sarah I raised was loud. She laughed at her own jokes. She wore bright colors and spoke her mind and never apologized for taking up space. Where did that girl go? I saw that mother-in-law of yours move in and never leave. She was supposed to stay for 2 weeks while her apartment was being renovated. That was 7 years ago, Sarah. 7 years of her living in your home, eating your food, criticizing everything you do. I saw how she treats you like a servant in your own home. I visited once, remember? 3 years ago for your birthday. I watched her order you around like you were the maid. Get me coffee. This chicken is dry. Why is there dust on the bookshelf? And you just took it. You apologized. You tried harder. You made yourself smaller so she could feel bigger. It broke my heart. Remember 3 years ago when you were offered that creative director position? Great salary, real career growth, a chance to finally use that talent God gave you. You turned it down. You told me Patricia was sick and needed you at home. You said it was just temporary. You said family comes first. 1 month later, I saw an announcement in the paper. Your mother-in-law was opening a second salon location. There was a photograph of her cutting the ribbon, smiling like she had won the lottery. What sickness, Sarah? What sickness requires you to give up your dreams while she expands her empire? Remember when you stopped seeing your friends? Jessica, That sweet girl from college. The one who used to make you laugh until you cried. You told me you were too busy. You told me David did not like you staying out late, but he goes out every Friday night and comes home after midnight. I know because I called your apartment once. 10:30 on a Friday. You answered. You were alone. You said David was out with work friends. You said it happened every week. Why can he stay out late, but you cannot? Why does he get to have friends, but you do not? I saw all of it, Sarah. Every holiday visit, every phone call, every time you made excuses for them, every time you defended behavior that should never be defended. I kept silent because I knew if I said anything, you would not believe me. You would defend your husband and his mother. You would tell me I was old and did not understand. And maybe you would have been right. Maybe I am just an old woman who worries too much. Maybe David and Patricia love you in their own way. But I do not think so. I think they saw something in you that they could use. Your kindness, your loyalty, your desperate need to be loved and accepted. And I think they have been using it ever since. But now you have something that gives you a choice. These properties, this money, it is not just real estate. It is your freedom. Freedom, Sarah. It is the freedom to stay if you want to stay, and it is the freedom to leave if you need to leave. If you love David, if you are truly happy, then stay. Live your life. Use this money to build something beautiful together. But now you will be living by choice, not because you have nowhere else to go. And if you realize you deserve better, you will have somewhere to go. You will have a roof over your head. Several roofs, actually. You will never need to depend on anyone who does not deserve your trust. One more thing, darling, and this is very important. Please read this part carefully. Please remember it. Please follow it exactly. After you find out about this inheritance, the people around you may change. There might be strange conversations, sudden interest in your finances, questions about the properties, requests for money, pressure to share, to transfer, to sign documents you do not understand. If this happens, do not rush to react. Do not scream. Do not cry. Do not accuse. Listen first. Let people finish talking. Let them show you who they truly are. Because people only show their true colors when they think no one is watching. When they believe you will never find out. When they feel safe enough to reveal what they really want. Give them that safety, Sarah. Let them talk. Let them plan. Let them show you exactly who they are, and then decide what to do. Remember this, Sarah, this is important. I asked my lawyer about this specifically. Property acquired through inheritance is your separate property. It belongs to you and only you. No spouse can touch it unless you allow them to. The law is very clear about this. Never sign anything putting their name on your inheritance. Not even to show trust. Not even to prove your love. Not even if they cry or beg or threaten. Never transfer ownership to show trust. Trust is earned with actions, not paperwork. Anyone who truly loves you will not need their name on your property to believe in your commitment. If they pressure you, that tells you something. If they get angry when you say no, that tells you something. If they make you feel guilty for protecting what is yours, that tells you everything. I believe in you, Sarah. You are strong even when you feel weak. You are smart even when they make you feel stupid. You are worthy of love, real love, even when they make you feel like you have to earn it. You just forgot that somewhere along the way. It is time to remember. With all my love, now and always, your grandma. Ruth. P.S. I hid some extra cash in the cabin. Under the floorboard in the bedroom near the window. $20,000. Emergency money. Just in case. I sat in Margaret's office and cried until I could not cry anymore. I cried for my grandmother, who had loved me enough to protect me, even from the grave. I cried for myself, for the girl I used to be, for the woman I had become. I cried for 9 years of a marriage I was suddenly seeing in a completely different light. When I finally composed myself, I thanked Margaret, gathered the documents, and left. Walking through the city toward home, I felt like I was floating. Like the ground was not quite solid beneath my feet, like I had stepped into someone else's life and was waiting to wake up from the dream. $937,000. I kept repeating the number in my head, trying to make it real. I could pay off all our debts. I could buy us a real home. I could finally have the children David kept saying we could not afford. We had been trying for 3 years. Every month, hope. Every month, disappointment. Every month, David saying maybe next year, maybe when we have more money, maybe when things are more stable. Now we had money. Now things could be stable. Now all our dreams could come true. I stopped at a flower shop on the corner of 5th and Main, a little place I had walked past 100 times but never entered. The kind of place I could never justify spending money at. But today was different. Today I was a woman with $937,000. Today I could afford $24.99 for roses. I bought 2 dozen, red roses, David's favorite. I was so excited to tell him the news. I practically ran the last 3 blocks to our apartment building. I was already planning the conversation in my head, the look on his face when I told him, the celebration we would have, the future we would finally be able to build. So naive, so trusting, so completely, utterly blind. Those roses turned out to be the most expensive lesson of my life. I arrived at our apartment building around 4 in the afternoon. The sun was still high, the air was warm. It was a perfect spring day. As I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, I heard voices coming from inside our apartment. David and his mother Patricia were home early. Strange, since David usually worked until 6 and Patricia was supposed to be at her salon until 7. Maybe they had heard the news somehow. Maybe they were planning a surprise for me. Maybe this day was about to get even better. I put my key in the lock, but something made me pause. Something in the tone of their voices. They did not sound celebratory. They did not sound excited. They sounded conspiratorial, secretive, like they were planning something they did not want anyone to hear. Grandma's words echoed in my mind. People only show their true colors when they think no one is watching. So I did something I had never done before. Instead of walking in, I opened the door just a crack and listened. What I heard destroyed my entire world. Patricia's voice came first, sharp and satisfied. The voice of a woman who had just won something. Karen at the clerk's office confirmed everything. 3 condos, a cabin, and a fat bank account. That senile old woman was sitting on a fortune while living like a bag lady. My heart stopped. Literally stopped. For one terrible moment, I thought I was going to collapse right there in the hallway. Karen, Patricia's friend who worked at the county clerk's office. The one who came to our apartment for wine nights. The one who got free manicures at Patricia's salon in exchange for favors. The one who had apparently been illegally accessing my grandmother's confidential estate records. So Grandma Ruth was loaded this whole time? That was David, my husband, the man I had loved for 9 years, the man I had just bought roses for, the man whose children I had been trying to have. His voice sounded different, excited, greedy, like a child who had just discovered where the Christmas presents were hidden. Loaded and smart, Patricia replied. She kept it hidden because she knew exactly what kind of people would come crawling out when money is involved. People like us, you mean? David laughed when he said it, like it was a joke, like being the kind of person who comes crawling out for money was something to be proud of. I pressed my back against the hallway wall, trying not to breathe. My hands were shaking. The roses were trembling in my grip. People like us know how to take opportunities, Patricia said. Her voice was smooth, confident. This was not a woman who was improvising. This was a woman who had a plan. Your wife is weak, David. She has always been weak. She will do whatever you tell her. You just have to play it right. I heard footsteps. Someone was pacing. David, probably. He always paced when he was thinking. Here is what is going to happen, Patricia continued. When Sarah finds out about the inheritance, and she will soon, you are going to be the perfect husband. I held my breath. Romantic, attentive. Bring her flowers. Take her to dinner. Tell her how much you love her. Make her feel like the center of your world. I thought about the roses in my hand. The roses I had bought because I loved him. The roses that suddenly felt like a cruel joke. Talk about finally having children, Patricia said. My stomach dropped. We have been talking about kids for years, David replied. She wants them so badly. She cries about it sometimes. Exactly. Use my pain, use my longing for a family. Use the thing that kept me awake at night, crying into my pillow, wondering why my body would not cooperate. Use it like a weapon. Tell her you want to sell the condos and buy a family home, Patricia instructed. A big house in the suburbs, room for kids, a backyard, the whole American dream. She would love that, David said. She has always wanted a house with a yard. Of course she has. That is the point. Tell her you want to put the house in your name because you are the husband, you are the provider. It is traditional. Tell her your ego is hurt, that she inherited so much and you have nothing. Make her feel guilty. Make her want to prove her trust. And if she says no, there was a long pause. A pause that stretched on for so long I thought maybe the conversation was over. Then Patricia spoke again. She will not say no. Your wife does not know how to say no. That is why I chose her for you in the first place. Chose her. The words hit me like a physical blow. Patricia had chosen me for David. Like I was a product on a shelf. Like I was a candidate for a job position. Like I was a target. But if she does say no, Patricia continued, her voice dropping to something cold and hard and terrifying, we have other options. What kind of options? David, do you know how I really lost my salon 5 years ago? The fire. The electrical problem. I remembered that fire. I had helped Patricia file the insurance claim. I had held her hand while she cried about losing her business. I had made her soup and told her everything would be okay. There was no electrical problem. My blood ran cold. I needed that insurance money. The salon was failing. I was 3 months behind on the lease. I was going to lose everything. So I made a choice, and I got the money. You burned it down yourself? I am saying I know how to solve problems, David. I am saying that when something is in your way, you remove it. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stop from screaming. My whole body was shaking. I could feel my knees starting to buckle. Mom, are you saying what I think you are saying? I am saying we have options. Hopefully it will not come to that. Hopefully your pathetic little wife will sign over everything like a good girl. She has been trained well. She does what she is told. She apologizes when she has done nothing wrong. She makes herself small so we can feel big. I heard David laugh, a small, uncomfortable laugh. But he did not object. He did not say that is crazy or I would never hurt Sarah or what is wrong with you. He just laughed. But if she does not cooperate, Patricia said, her voice as casual as if she was discussing what to have for dinner. Well, accidents happen, do they not? What kind of accidents? Use your imagination, David. A fall down the stairs, a car accident on a rainy night, a tragic medication mix-up. The world is full of dangers for a careless young woman. I stood in that hallway shaking so violently I thought my legs would give out. My husband, the man I had shared a bed with for 9 years, the man who kissed me good morning and held me when I cried and told me he loved me every single night. He was sitting in our kitchen, listening to his mother suggest they might need to kill me for my inheritance. And he was not objecting. He was not horrified. He was not calling the police or telling her she was insane. He was asking follow-up questions. So, David said slowly, the plan is to get her to sell everything, put it in my name, and then what? Then we split it. 50-50, you get your auto body shop. I get my new salon, bigger and better than the old one. And Sarah, well, Patricia paused. Sarah will have served her purpose. Served her purpose. That was all I was to them. A purpose, a means to an end. 9 years of marriage, and I was nothing but a stepping stone to their dreams. I backed away from the door on silent feet. My whole body was numb. I could not feel my hands. I could not feel my face. I was operating on pure survival instinct. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the roses. Those stupid, naive roses, $24.99 of pure foolishness. I made it to the stairwell before my legs finally gave out. I sat on the cold concrete steps and pressed my fists against my eye, trying to think, trying to breathe, trying to process what I had just heard. My husband wanted to kill me. My mother-in-law had planned my murder. My entire marriage was a lie. Grandma's letter, her warning, she knew. Somehow, from her tiny room in her rundown apartment, she had seen exactly what kind of people they were. Do not react. Do not cry. Do not accuse. Listen first. Let them show you who they truly are. They had shown me. Oh God, they had shown me. I took a deep breath, then another, then another. I looked at the roses in my hand and almost laughed. How ridiculous I had been. How blind. How desperately, pathetically trusting. Then I pulled out my phone and made a decision that would change everything. I was not going to run. Running would alert them. Running would make them desperate. Desperate people did desperate things. I was not going to confront them. Confrontation would give them time to regroup, time to make new plans, time to move up their timeline. I was going to do exactly what Grandma Ruth told me to do. I was going to watch. I was going to listen. I was going to gather evidence. Every conversation, every plan, every whispered scheme. I was going to document it all. And when the time was right, when I had everything I needed, I was going to strike. They thought I was weak. They thought I was pathetic. They thought I would do whatever I was told. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The next morning, I met my best friend, Jessica Marie Thompson, at a coffee shop downtown. Not our usual place. Somewhere new. Somewhere Patricia and David would never think to look for me. Jess and I had been roommates in college. We had shared a tiny dorm room for 4 years, survived finals together, cried over breakups together, built each other up when the world tried to tear us down. She was the one person I trusted completely. The one person who had never liked David or his mother, even when I was too blind to see why. She worked as a nurse at the county hospital now. Emergency room, night shift. She had seen enough human darkness to believe anything. She had held dying patients and comforted grieving families and witnessed the absolute worst that people could do to each other. If anyone could handle what I was about to tell her, it was Jess. I told her everything. The inheritance, the attorney's office, the letter from Grandma Ruth, the conversation I had overheard, every word, every plan, every threat. When I finished, Jess stared at me for a full 30 seconds without blinking. Her coffee sat untouched in front of her. Her hands were flat on the table. Her face was completely expressionless. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," she finally said. Her voice was calm, too calm, the calm of someone who was processing something massive. "Yes. Your grandmother, the woman who made us split a sandwich in college because food should not go to waste, left you almost $1 million? Yes. And your husband and his demon mother are planning to steal it and possibly murder you?" That is what it sounded like. Jess set down her coffee cup very carefully. She placed it exactly in the center of her saucer. She aligned the handle perfectly with the edge of the table. Then she looked up at me. Girl, I know. I have been telling you that woman was evil since 2016, Sarah. 2016. That is 9 years. 9 years of me saying something is wrong with her. And you telling me I was being paranoid. I know, Jess. I know. Remember when she accidentally donated your wedding dress to Goodwill? Accidentally? That dress still had the tags on it, Sarah. It was hanging in a garment bag in your closet. How do you accidentally donate something in a garment bag with tags? In hindsight, that was suspicious. Suspicious? She looked you in the eye and said she thought it was old clothes for charity. Old clothes? Your wedding dress. The dress you were going to wear in 3 weeks. And you apologized to her for not labeling it better. I cringed. I remembered that conversation. I remembered feeling guilty. I remembered thinking I should have been more careful. And remember when she told everyone at your birthday party that you had been fired from your first job? You had not been fired. You had been laid off. There is a difference. But she made sure everyone knew, with that fake sympathetic voice. Oh, Sarah has had such a hard time with employment. She said she misremembered. She did not misremember. She was undermining you. She has been undermining you for your entire marriage, and you just kept making excuses for her. Jess was right. She had always been right. I had just been too in love, too desperate to make my marriage work, to see it. What is your plan? She asked. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app. I had been making lists all night. I had not slept at all. I had sat in a 24-hour diner drinking coffee and planning, while David and Patricia thought I was at a friend's house dealing with a crisis. I called the attorney this morning, I said. The one who handled my grandmother's estate. She recommended a family law specialist named Margaret Nelson. I have an appointment tomorrow. Good. What else? Here's what I learned. I need to keep everything separate. Separate bank account at a different bank. Not just a different branch, a completely different bank. Somewhere Patricia's connections cannot reach. Smart, safe deposit box for my important documents. The deeds, the certificates, the letter from Grandma Ruth, everything. What about the recordings? I'm going to record everything, I said. In this state, I can legally record any conversation I am a part of. One-party consent. I looked it up last night. Jess nodded slowly. I am documenting everything. Dates, names, locations, what they say, what they do, how they look at me, every suspicious conversation, every pressure tactic, every threat. You are building a case. I am building an arsenal. For the first time since I started talking, Jess smiled. That is my girl, she said. That is the Sarah I remember, the one who does not take garbage from anyone. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Now, what do you need from me? A place to stay if things go wrong. Somewhere they do not know about. Done. My apartment. I will give you a key today, and someone to remind me not to lose my nerve. Someone to tell me I am not crazy when they start gaslighting me. You are not crazy, Jess said firmly. They are psychopaths. There is a difference. And if something happens to me, nothing is going to happen to you. But if it does, I need someone to know the truth. I need someone to make sure they do not get away with it. Jess's eyes hardened. If something happens to you, she said, I will burn their lives to the ground. I know people in law enforcement. I know people in the press. I know people who know people. They will not get away with anything. I felt tears prick my eyes. Not sad tears, grateful tears. Thank you, Jess. You have both, she said. A place to stay and someone in your corner. Always. I went home that afternoon and did the hardest thing I have ever done. I acted completely normal. I walked through the door with the roses still in my hand. I had thrown away the old ones and bought fresh ones on the way home. Same flowers, same receipt, no evidence that I had been anywhere unusual. David, I am home, I called out. I brought you something. He came out of the bedroom with that smile, that fake, practiced, loving smile that I now recognize for exactly what it was. Roses? For me? What is the occasion? I just felt lucky today, I said. I kissed him on the cheek. His skin felt cold. Or maybe I was the one who was cold. Lucky to have you. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Patricia emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. How sweet, she said. Her voice dripped with honey. Fake honey. You two are so adorable together, I smiled at her. The woman who had planned my murder. The woman who had called me pathetic. The woman who had chosen me for her son like a cow at an auction. Thank you, Patricia. That means so much coming from you. She had no idea. No idea that I had heard everything. No idea that I was already planning my escape. Over the next week, I played my role perfectly. I kissed David on the cheek every morning. I cooked dinner every night. I laughed at Patricia's jokes and complimented her outfits and asked about her day at the salon. And every single moment, my phone was recording. Every time David touched me, I wanted to scream. His hands felt like poison on my skin. His kisses made me want to vomit. But I smiled. I leaned into his embrace. I told him I loved him. Every time Patricia made one of her snide comments about my cooking or my appearance or my so-called job, I wanted to tell her exactly what I knew. I wanted to watch her face as she realized her plan was falling apart. But I kept my mouth shut. I kept my expression neutral. I kept my recorder running. I quietly began preparing my escape. I opened a new bank account at a credit union across town. I deposited small amounts of cash. Nothing that would show up on our joint account statements. Nothing that would raise suspicion. I rented a safe deposit box at a different bank. I stored copies of every important document, the deeds, the certificates, the recordings I was making. I started making copies of everything, financial records, property deeds, emails, text messages, anything that might be useful. And I waited. I waited for them to make their move. It came exactly 10 days after I learned about the inheritance. I came home from a meeting with my lawyer to find David sitting at the kitchen table with a bottle of wine and two glasses. "Sarah," he said with that smile, "we need to talk about our future." David poured me a glass of wine and sat across from me at the kitchen table. The good wine, the expensive bottle we saved for special occasions. Patricia was conveniently absent. She had gone to visit a friend, David said. She would be back later. But I knew better. This was planned. This was scripted. Patricia was probably sitting in her car around the corner, waiting for a text message telling her how it went. "I have been thinking," David began. His voice was warm, sincere, the voice of a man who loved his wife and wanted to build a future with her. 9 years ago, that voice would have melted me. 9 years ago, I would have believed every word. Now I heard the rehearsal, the careful pacing, the strategic pauses. "We have been married for 9 years," he continued. 9 beautiful years. But I feel like we have been stuck in the same place, renting this apartment, barely making ends meet, no children. He reached across the table and took my hand. "It is not right, Sarah. You deserve better. We deserve better." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral, sympathetic, loving. My phone was in my pocket, recording everything. "What do you propose?" I asked. "I want us to grow together," David said. His thumb traced circles on my palm. "I do not want to be a sales manager my whole life. I have bigger dreams." "We have bigger dreams," he paused for effect. "I want to open my own business. The auto body shop I have always talked about. I know the industry. I have the experience. I have the contacts. I know it would work." "That is wonderful, David. But businesses cost money." He nodded solemnly, like he had not been thinking about this for months, like this was not exactly what Patricia had told him to say. "I know. That is the hard part. I would need startup capital. Significant startup capital." "How much?" 500,000 minimum. 700 would be better. For the space, the equipment, the employees, to do it right. I pretended to consider this. I took a sip of my wine. I let silence fill the space between us. "That is a lot of money," I finally said. "Where would we get that kind of capital?" David hesitated, just for a moment, just long enough for me to see him reach for the script in his mind. "Well," he said slowly, carefully, "I was hoping maybe you had some ideas, some options." "What options?" "I do not have that kind of money." "What about your grandmother?" There it was, the question he had been building toward, the question Patricia had coached him to ask. "Your grandmother passed away a few months ago," David continued. "Maybe she left you something, an inheritance?" I looked at him. The man I had loved for 9 years, the man who had held me when I cried about Grandma Ruth's death, the man who had told me everything would be okay. He had known about the inheritance all along. He had watched me grieve while planning how to steal what she had left me. And I felt nothing, not anger, not sadness, not betrayal, just cold, clear determination. "I do not know," I lied. "I have not heard anything from any attorneys. Maybe there is nothing to inherit." Grandma lived in poverty her whole life. She did not even own a car. David's face flickered, just for a moment, just long enough for me to see the frustration behind his eyes. Then the mask slipped back into place. "Maybe you should look into it," he suggested. His voice was still warm, still loving, still fake. "Call some attorneys, check the county records. There might be something." "Maybe," I said. "I will think about it." Over the next 2 weeks, the pressure increased. David brought up money constantly, casually, like it was just normal conversation. "I saw a great location for a shop today. Only 400,000 for the lease and equipment. My buddy from high school opened his own business. He said it was the best decision he ever made. Imagine if we could just start over. New business, new house, new life." Patricia started asking pointed questions about my grandmother, her apartment, her belongings, her finances. "Have you gone through Ruth's things yet? There might be valuable antiques. Did your grandmother have a safety deposit box?" Old people often hide cash. "I knew a woman whose mother left her a fortune she did not even know about. You should really investigate." They were getting impatient. I could feel it. The pressure was building. The timeline was accelerating. Meanwhile, I was making progress of my own. I had hired Margaret Nelson as my divorce attorney. She was sharp, experienced, and not at all surprised by what I told her. Apparently, schemes like this were more common than I wanted to believe. I had documented 17 separate conversations where David and Patricia discussed their plan. Some were explicit, some were coded. All of them were damning. I had found newspaper articles about the suspicious fire that destroyed Patricia's salon 5 years ago. The investigation had been closed due to lack of evidence, but the insurance company had noted irregularities. The case was never conclusively resolved. I thought I had everything I needed. I was ready to file for divorce. I was ready to hand over my evidence to the police. I was ready to end this nightmare and start my new life. I was so confident. I was so naive. I was so wrong. It was a Thursday evening when everything fell apart. I came home from a meeting with Margaret to find David and Patricia waiting in the living room. They were not alone. A man in a suit sat on our couch. Expensive suit, confident posture. The kind of man who was used to being in charge. "Sarah," David said with that fake smile. "Perfect timing. Come sit down." My stomach dropped. "What is going on?" "This is Robert Williams from First National Bank," Patricia said. She was practically glowing. "We have wonderful news." Robert Williams stood and shook my hand. His grip was firm, professional. "Mrs. Crawford," he said, "it is a pleasure to meet you. Your husband and mother-in-law have told me so much about you." I sat down slowly. My heart was pounding. Something was very wrong. "David told us about your grandmother's passing," Patricia said. Her voice was syrupy with fake sympathy. "Such a tragedy. We were all so devastated. She had never met my grandmother. She had refused to come to the funeral. She had called Grandma Ruth a crazy old woman who should have been in a home. But Robert here has helped us understand something important," Patricia continued. "As David's wife, there are certain financial opportunities you should be aware of." Robert Williams smiled and reached into his briefcase. "Mrs. Crawford, I have prepared some documents for the consolidation of your family assets. Standard procedure for estate planning. Very common among married couples." He opened a folder and laid it on the coffee table in front of me. "If you could just sign here, here, and here, we can get everything sorted out today." I looked at the documents. I read them carefully, despite their expectant stares, and I felt the blood drain from my face. It was a property transfer agreement. Detailed, legal, binding. If I signed it, all three of my condos would become joint marital property. David would own half of everything. In a divorce, he could claim it all. They had brought in a real banker, with real documents, designed to steal my inheritance. And they expected me to sign on the spot, like a trusting fool, like the pathetic little wife Patricia had trained me to be. "I need to read these first," I said. My voice was steady, barely. "Do not be silly," Patricia snapped. The warmth was gone from her voice now. Robert explained everything. "You do not need to understand the details. That is what husbands are for." I looked at David. He was watching me with an expression I had never seen before. Cold, calculating, impatient. The mask was slipping. "Come on, honey," he said. "It is just paperwork. We are a team, remember? What is mine is yours. What is yours is mine." I stood up. I said, "I need to read them. I am not signing anything tonight." Patricia's face twisted with fury. Just for a moment. Just long enough for me to see the real woman beneath the mask. Robert Williams shifted uncomfortably. This was clearly not going according to plan. I grabbed my purse and walked toward the door. "Sarah, where are you going?" David stood up and grabbed my arm. His grip was tight. "Bruising, we are having a family meeting. I am going for a walk. I need air." I pulled away and opened the door. "This is exactly the problem, David." Patricia's voice followed me into the hallway. "She does not respect you. A real wife would trust her husband. A real wife would sign without asking questions." I made it to the street before I started running. I spent that night at Jess's apartment, unable to stop shaking. I sat on her couch wrapped in a blanket, drinking tea that I could not taste, telling her everything that had happened. The banker, the documents, the look in David's eyes, the bruises forming on my arm where he had grabbed me. Jess took pictures of the bruises. Time-stamped, documented, evidence. "You cannot go back there," she said. You know that, right? I know. They are escalating. The timeline is accelerating. Whatever they have planned, it is happening soon. I know. I did not sleep that night. I lay on Jess's couch, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible scenario in my mind. The next morning, I called Margaret to tell her what had happened. That is when I learned just how badly I had underestimated my enemies. Sarah, Margaret's voice was grave, more serious than I had ever heard it. We have a problem. What kind of problem? Someone filed a protective order against you. The words did not make sense. They bounced around in my brain, refusing to form a coherent meaning. A protective order? Against me? David claims you have been erratic, threatening, and mentally unstable. He says you have been exhibiting paranoid behavior. He says you attacked his mother last night. I never touched her. I just left. I know. But he has photographs. Photographs of what? Bruises on Patricia's arm. My blood ran cold. Patricia had bruises. Patricia, who had not been touched by anyone. Patricia, who had been standing perfectly fine when I walked out the door. She had done it to herself. She had injured herself to frame me. It gets worse, Margaret continued. He has filed for emergency temporary custody of marital assets. Custody? But we do not have children. Not custody of children. Custody of assets. There is an obscure legal provision. If one spouse can prove the other is mentally incompetent or poses a flight risk, they can petition for emergency control of marital property. It is rarely used, but it exists. But the inheritance is my separate property. He cannot touch it. Here is the problem, Sarah. Margaret's voice was heavy. He has also filed a motion claiming you have been mixing inheritance funds with marital funds. If he can prove that, even partially, the line between separate and marital property gets blurry. That is not possible. I have been so careful. Everything is separate. Check your accounts, Margaret said. Check them right now. I opened my banking app with trembling hands. And then I saw it. 3 transfers. 3 transfers I did not make. 3 transfers I did not authorize. $15,000 moved from my inheritance account into our joint account. Oh my God, I whispered. There are transfers I did not make. Someone moved money from my inheritance account. They have access to your accounts? I had the same password on everything, I admitted. David and I shared everything. I never thought they commingled the funds deliberately, Margaret said. They are building a case that the inheritance was always intended to be marital property, that you were planning to share it, that separating it now is a sign of mental instability and bad faith. I felt like the ground was opening beneath me. In 24 hours, I went from thinking I was in control to watching my entire plan collapse. They had outmaneuvered me. They had thought of everything. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Friday. 2 days away, 2 days to prepare for a battle I had not seen coming. I walked into that courtroom with Margaret at my side, hoping the judge would see through their lies. I was wrong. David's lawyer was smooth, polished, expensive. The kind of lawyer who specialized in making lies sound like truth. He presented photographs of Patricia's bruises, close-up shots that made them look worse than they were, photographs that conveniently left out any context. He described my behavior as erratic and dangerous. He talked about my sudden interest in separate bank accounts, my secret meetings with lawyers, my unexplained absences from the marital home. He painted a picture of a mentally unstable woman who needed to be protected from herself, a woman who might destroy property out of spite, a woman who might flee the state with marital assets. I never touched her, I said. She is lying. Those bruises are self-inflicted. The judge, a stern-faced man named William Harrison, frowned at my outburst. Mrs. Crawford, please control yourself. As you can see, Your Honor, David's lawyer said smoothly, my client's wife is volatile and unpredictable. She cannot even remain calm in a courtroom. We are requesting temporary control of all assets until a full psychological evaluation can be completed. I watched Judge Harrison look at those fake photographs. I watched David put on his concerned husband act, the worried expression, the sympathetic glances at his wife, the perfect performance of a man who only wanted to help. I watched Patricia dab her eyes with a tissue, playing the victim, the loving mother-in-law who had been attacked by her own daughter-in-law, the innocent woman who just wanted peace, and I realized I was going to lose. The judge granted the temporary order. David was given control of my properties, all three condos, the cabin, the bank accounts. I was ordered to have no contact with Patricia. I was required to submit to a psychological evaluation within 30 days. A psychological evaluation. Like I was the crazy one. Like I was the threat. I walked out of that courthouse with nothing. They had frozen my accounts. I could not access my own money. I could not access my grandmother's properties. I could not even go home. I had a court order suggesting I might be mentally ill, a document that would follow me, that would color every future legal proceeding. And through the window of the courthouse lobby, I could see David and Patricia standing on the courthouse steps, hugging each other, celebrating, triumphant. They had won. I sat on a bench across the street and cried until I could not breathe. People walked past me. Some stared. Some looked away. No one stopped. I was 32 years old. I was married to a man who wanted me dead. I had lost everything my grandmother had spent 40 years building, and I had no idea what to do next. 1 week passed, 7 days, 168 hours. Every single one of them felt like drowning. I was still staying at Jess's apartment, sleeping on her couch because I could not afford a hotel, and I was too ashamed to ask for money. I barely ate. Food tasted like cardboard. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Patricia's voice. Accidents happen. Do they not? I had lost everything. My marriage was a lie. 9 years of love, devotion, sacrifice. All of it fake. A performance designed to steal my grandmother's money. My husband wanted me dead. The man who held me when I cried. The man who promised to love me until death do us part. He was planning to make that death happen a lot sooner than I expected. And now he controlled all the assets my grandmother had spent 40 years accumulating. The condos she had saved for. The cabin she had dreamed about. The money she had denied herself so I could have a future. All of it was in David's hands. I spent most of that week staring at the ceiling. Jess tried to get me to eat. She made soup. She made sandwiches. She made my favorite pasta with garlic bread. I took 3 bites and threw up. On the 5th day, I wrote a letter. Not a suicide note, nothing like that. Just a letter to my grandmother telling her I was sorry. Sorry I had failed. Sorry I had trusted the wrong people. Sorry I had not been smart enough or strong enough to protect what she had built. I never sent it, but writing it helped somehow. On the 7th day, I was ready to give up. I had called Margaret 6 times and gotten voicemail. I had no money, no home, no hope. I was sitting on Jess's couch at 3 in the afternoon, still in my pajamas, wondering if this was how the rest of my life would look. Then my phone rang. Sure, Margaret's voice was different, electric. I found something. I sat up for the first time in days. What? Karen Peterson, the clerk who was feeding Patricia information. She was just fired for ethics violations. Apparently she was running schemes for other people too, and someone finally reported her. And here's the important part. She is angry. She feels betrayed by Patricia, and she is willing to talk. Talk about what? About everything. Margaret paused, including the fact that Patricia paid her to access your grandmother's estate records before Ruth even died. My heart stopped. What did you just say? Karen has text messages, Sarah. Text messages proving Patricia knew about the inheritance 3 months before your grandmother passed away. 3 months. While Ruth was still alive, Patricia was already planning how to steal her money. How is that possible? How could she know? Because Patricia was monitoring your grandmother's mail. She intercepted correspondence from a real estate attorney about updating the will. She knew about the inheritance before anyone else did. Before you, before me, before Ruth's own attorney could contact you. I felt sick. Patricia had been watching my grandmother, stalking her mail, waiting for her to die like a vulture circling a wounded animal. What else does Karen know? Everything. How Patricia planned this scheme for years. How she targeted you specifically because you had no other family, no parents to ask questions, no siblings to get suspicious, no one to protect you. I closed my eyes. David was supposed to marry someone with money, Margaret continued. That was always the plan. When you did not have any, they almost abandoned the scheme. Patricia told David to divorce you and find someone else. But then they discovered Ruth's secret fortune, and suddenly you became valuable again. So my entire marriage was a business decision. I am afraid so. And she will testify to all of this? Karen will actually go to court? She will. She is facing criminal charges for the ethics violations. 5 to 7 years if convicted. She is willing to cooperate for a reduced sentence. She will say whatever we need her to say as long as it is the truth. For the first time in 7 days, I felt something other than despair. I felt hope, and right behind it, I felt rage. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the next morning. I did not sleep that night. I sat at Jess's kitchen table going over every document, every text message, every piece of evidence Margaret had gathered. When I walked into that courtroom, I was not the broken woman who had cried on a park bench a week ago. I was a woman with ammunition. David was already there with his expensive lawyer. He looked confident, smug, like he had already won. Patricia sat behind him wearing a conservative dress and a sympathetic expression. The concerned mother, the innocent victim, the woman I had supposedly attacked. I wanted to scream. I wanted to leap across the courtroom and show her what a real attack looked like. But I stayed calm. I stayed silent. I let Margaret do the talking. Your Honor, Margaret began, we have evidence that the petitioner engaged in illegal surveillance, witness tampering, and conspiracy to defraud. Karen Peterson, a former employee of the county clerk's office, is prepared to testify that she was paid by Patricia Crawford to illegally access county records and feed confidential information about the respondent's grandmother before Ruth Hayes even passed away. David's face went white. Patricia's smile froze. Judge Harrison leaned forward. Continue. Margaret presented the text messages. She presented the bank records showing cash payments from Patricia to Karen. She presented the timeline showing Patricia knew about the inheritance 3 months before anyone else. Furthermore, Margaret said, we have evidence that the $15,000 transfer used to claim commingling of funds was made by David Crawford using passwords he obtained by accessing his wife's computer without authorization. We have IP address logs. We have timestamps. We have proof that this was deliberate financial fraud designed to steal my client's separate property. Judge Harrison turned to David. His eyes were cold. Mr. Crawford, is this true? David looked at his lawyer. His lawyer looked at the floor. I was just trying to help manage our finances, David stammered. It was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. The judge's voice could have frozen water. You accessed your wife's accounts without permission. You transferred her inheritance into a joint account. You then used that transfer as evidence to claim she was mentally unstable and take control of her property. That is not a misunderstanding, Mr. Crawford. That is fraud. He turned to Patricia. And you, Mrs. Crawford, you paid a county employee to illegally access confidential records. You monitored a dying woman's mail. You conspired to steal your daughter-in-law's inheritance. Patricia opened her mouth to speak. I would advise you to remain silent, the judge said. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the criminal proceedings that I am personally going to recommend. He picked up his gavel. This court reverses the temporary order in its entirety. All assets are returned to Mrs. Sarah Crawford's control immediately. The protective order against Mrs. Crawford is dismissed, and I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation into fraud, theft, and conspiracy. The gavel came down. I looked at David. He would not meet my eyes. I looked at Patricia. Her face was purple with rage, but for once, she had nothing to say. I walked out of that courthouse feeling like I could finally breathe again. The sun was shining, the air smelled like spring. I stood on the courthouse steps and let the warmth wash over me. I had won, but I should have known. With Patricia Crawford, it was never over, not until someone was destroyed. That night, I was at my grandmother's North Side condo for the first time in weeks. My condo now, my property, my home. I walked through every room, touching the walls, the counters, the door frames. Everything looked the same, but it felt different. It felt like mine. I was exhausted, emotionally drained. But for the first time in weeks, I was also relieved. The worst was behind me. I had my property back. I had evidence against Patricia. I had a clear path to divorce and freedom. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window watching the city lights. Tomorrow I would start planning my new life. Tonight I would just breathe. Then there was a knock at the door. I froze. It was almost 10 at night. No one knew I was here except Jess and Margaret. The knock came again, louder. I picked up my phone, ready to call 911. Then I looked through the peephole. A young woman, blonde, maybe 28, heavy makeup, designer clothes that did not quite fit right, and a very visible baby bump. "Who is it?" I called through the door. "Are you Sarah?" The woman's voice was shaky. "David's wife." My blood turned to ice. "Who are you? Please open the door. I know how this looks, but I need to talk to you. It is important." It is life or death, important. Against every instinct I had, I opened the door. Up close, she looked younger and scared. Her mascara was smudged like she had been crying. Her hands were trembling. "My name is Amber Jensen," she said. "I am the woman your husband has been sleeping with for the past year. I am pregnant with his baby, and I know everything." For a long moment, I could not speak. I had suspected David was cheating. The late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the way he guarded his phone like it contained nuclear codes. But suspecting and knowing are two very different things. And knowing that his mistress was standing in my doorway, pregnant with his child, was something I could never prepared for. "You should let me in," Amber said, "because what I'm about to tell you is going to save your life." I stepped aside. She walked in. We sat across from each other in my grandmother's living room. Two women who should have been enemies. Two women who had loved the same man. Two women who had been used by the same family. "How long?" I heard myself ask. "How long has this been going on?" 14 months. He told me you were separated. He said you were just staying together for financial reasons. He said the marriage was over and you both knew it. Of course he did. I believed him, Amber said. I know that makes me stupid. I know I should have checked. But he was so convincing, so charming, and I thought I loved him. I laughed. I did not mean to, but I could not help it. I know exactly how convincing he can be. Amber nodded. She looked down at her belly. "When I found out I was pregnant, I was happy. He said he was happy too. He said he was going to leave you and marry me. He said we were going to have a beautiful life together." "Let me guess. As soon as you had access to my inheritance." Amber's head snapped up. "You know, I found out a few weeks ago, David and his mother have been planning to steal my grandmother's money since before she died." "It is worse than that," Amber whispered. "It is so much worse." She took a deep breath. "Last week, after the court reversed the order and gave you back the properties, David and Patricia were furious. I was at their apartment. They thought I was asleep in the bedroom, but I could hear them talking in the kitchen. What did they say? Patricia said the legal approach was not working. She said they needed to move to the backup plan." "What backup plan?" Amber's eyes filled with tears. "You, Sarah. The backup plan was you. If the legal stuff did not work, there was going to be an accident. They were going to make it look like you fell down the stairs, or drove off a bridge, or had some kind of tragic mishap that could not be traced back to them. The room started spinning. They were going to kill me. They were going to kill you," Amber confirmed. "And then David was going to marry me, and we would live happily ever after on your grandmother's money." That was the plan. I stood up. I walked to the window. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and tried to breathe. My husband was planning to murder me. Not in some abstract, theoretical way. Not someday, maybe, if things got bad. Now, soon. As a concrete, specific plan with a timeline and a method. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked without turning around. "Why warn me? If I die, you get David. You get the money. You get everything." "Because I am not going to prison for murder," Amber said flatly. "David is charming, but he is weak. His mother controls him completely. If they kill you and get caught, they will throw me under the bus so fast my head will spin. The pregnant mistress makes a perfect scapegoat. So this is about protecting yourself." "Partly, but there is another reason." I turned around. Amber was crying now. Real tears. "I found out I am not the first." "What do you mean? David was married before you." "His first wife was named Linda. Linda Marie Crawford. They were married for 3 years. I felt like the floor was tilting. There was a first wife. She died in a car accident 6 months after inheriting her father's business. It was a rainy night, a mountain road, a sharp curve. Her car went off a cliff. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself. The police called it an accident, Amber continued. But Patricia collected the life insurance, $200,000. And 8 months later, David married you. I did the math. Linda died. David collected insurance. David married me. I was supposed to inherit money. I was supposed to die. Oh my God, I whispered. She has done this before. I think Patricia has been running this scheme for decades, Amber said. Find a woman with money or potential inheritance. Have David marry her. Charm her. Control her. Take everything. And if she does not cooperate, if she asks too many questions, if she becomes a liability, move her. Exactly. I sat down heavily. My legs would not hold me anymore. How do you know all this? About Linda? I hired a private investigator. After I heard them talking about the backup plan, I needed to know what I was dealing with. The investigator found Linda's death certificate. He found the insurance payout. He found newspaper articles about the accident. And he found something else. What? Linda's sister. Her name is Michelle. She never believed the accident story. She's been trying to get the police to reopen the investigation for 8 years. No one would listen to her. Does she have evidence? She has suspicions. She has questions. And now, with what I know and what you know, she might finally have answers. I stared at Amber. This woman I should have hated. This woman who had slept with my husband, carried his child, planned to take my place. She was saving my life. Why should I believe you, I asked. How do I know this is not another trick? Amber reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Because I recorded them, she said, the night they discussed the backup plan. I recorded everything. She pressed play. David's voice filled the room, clear, unmistakable, cold in a way I had never heard before. If she does not sign over the properties by the end of the month, we have to do what we did with Linda. Make it look like an accident. Mom knows how to handle it. Patricia's voice came next. The mountain road worked before. We just need to wait for a rainy night. I listened to my husband calmly discuss murdering me. I listened to my mother-in-law plan my death like she was planning a dinner party. And something inside me finally, completely, broke. Not with grief. I was past grief, not with fear. I was past fear. What I felt was ice. Pure, cold, absolute ice. They wanted to kill me? Fine. Let them try. I looked at Amber. I need you to do something for me, I said. What? I need you to testify. I need you to give this recording to the police. I need you to help me put them in prison for the rest of their miserable lives. Amber did not hesitate. When do we start? The next 3 days were a blur of activity. Margaret coordinated with the district attorney's office. Amber gave her testimony and handed over all her recordings. The police reopened the investigation into Linda Crawford's death, and I agreed to help them catch David and Patricia in the act. The plan was simple. I would arrange a meeting with David, wearing a wire. I would confront him about Linda and the murder plan. If he confessed, the police would have everything they needed. It was the most terrifying thing I have ever done. The morning of the meeting, I stood in front of the mirror for 20 minutes. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. She had dark circles under her eyes. Her cheeks were hollow. But there was something else in her eyes now. Something that had not been there 3 months ago. Steel. The police technician taped the recording device to my chest. His hands were clinical, professional, but I could see the concern in his eyes. Are you sure about this, ma'am? He asked. We can find another way. No, I said. I need to do this myself. I need to hear him say it to my face. Detective Morrison, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, put her hand on my shoulder. You are braver than you know, she said. We will be right outside. The moment you feel unsafe, say the word apple. We will be through that door in 15 seconds. Apple. Such a simple word, such a strange code for saving my life. I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early. I chose a table near the window where the police van could see me clearly. I ordered a black coffee and did not drink a single sip. My hands were shaking too badly. When David walked through the door, my heart stopped. He looked the The same brown hair, the same charming smile, the same blue eyes I had fallen in love with 11 years ago. For one terrible moment, I wanted to run to him. I wanted to pretend none of this was real. I wanted my old life back, the one where I did not know who he really was. But that life was built on lies. And I was done living in lies, Sarah. He sat across from me, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I know things have been difficult. Difficult? I almost laughed. My husband planned to murder me for my inheritance. Difficult does not begin to cover it. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months, and I saw it. The calculation behind his eyes, the way he was already planning his next move, his next manipulation. David, I said calmly, I know about Linda. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. What? Who told you about? Linda who? Your first wife. The one who died in a car accident 6 months after inheriting her father's company. The one whose life insurance went to your mother. His mouth opened and closed. For the first time in 9 years, David Crawford had nothing to say. That was different, he finally managed. That was an accident, was it? I leaned forward. Because I have been doing some research. Your mother's salon burned down 3 months after she increased her insurance policy. Linda died 2 months after her inheritance came through. And now, 8 months after my grandmother died, you and your mother were planning the same thing for me. You do not understand, he whispered. Then make me understand, David. Make me understand how the man I loved for 9 years could sit in our kitchen and listen to his mother plan my murder. Make me understand how you could hold me at night knowing what you were going to do. Something broke in his eyes. The mask he had worn for so long finally cracked. And what I saw underneath was not a monster. It was something worse. It was weakness. My mother controls everything, he said, his voice cracking. She always has. Since I was a child. You do not know what she is like, what she is capable of. I never had a choice. You always had a choice. You could have warned me. You could have gone to the police. You could have done anything except plan my death. She would have killed me too. His eyes filled with tears. Do you understand that? If I had refused, if I had tried to protect you, she would have gotten rid of both of us. I was trying to survive. By sacrificing me? He could not look at me. Tell me about Linda, I said. Tell me everything. And he did. For 23 minutes, David talked. He told me about meeting Linda at a business conference, how his mother had researched her background, discovered her father was dying, calculated that she would inherit within 2 years, how Patricia had coached him on exactly what to say, what to do, how to make Linda fall in love with him. She was kind, David said, tears streaming down his face. She was trusting. Just like you, she never suspected anything. He told me about the plan, how Patricia had tampered with Linda's car, how they had waited for a rainy night, how they had made sure she took the mountain road, the one with the sharp curve and the 200-foot drop. I wanted to stop it, David whispered. The night before, I almost told her. I had the words ready, but my mother found out. She said if I warned Linda, she would make sure I went down with her. So I stayed silent, and Linda died. I sat there listening to my husband confess to murder, and I felt something I did not expect. Pity, not forgiveness, never forgiveness, but pity for the broken, hollow man in front of me. The man who had been so controlled by his mother that he had forgotten he had a choice. The man who had sold his soul so many times he did not even remember he had one. Tell me about the plan for me, I said. I want to hear you say it. And he did. The staged accident, the timeline, the conversation with his mother about making it look like I fell down the stairs. Everything. When I walked out of that coffee shop, I did not look back. The police moved in fast. I watched from across the street as 2 officers approached David. He did not resist. He did not run. He just sat there, head bowed, like a man who had been waiting his whole life to be caught. Then I watched the police cars drive to our old apartment. I followed at a distance. I needed to see this. I needed to watch Patricia Crawford face the consequences of her actions. When they brought her out in handcuffs, she was screaming, "This is entrapment. This is illegal. I will destroy all of you. I have connections. I have lawyers. You have no idea who you are dealing with." Then she saw me standing across the street. For one moment, our eyes met. And in that moment, all her rage, all her hatred, all the venom she had been hiding behind her sweet mother-in-law smile came pouring out. You, she screamed, fighting against the officers holding her. You ungrateful little nothing. I gave my son to you. I welcomed you into my family. And this is how you repay me? I said nothing. I just stood there, watching the woman who had planned to kill me for my grandmother's money get shoved into the back of a police car. The last thing I heard before they drove away was her screaming. This is not over. Do you hear me, Sarah? This is not over, but it was. The trial took 4 months. Patricia's defense lawyer tried everything. He claimed the recordings were doctored. He claimed David was lying to get a reduced sentence. He claimed I had orchestrated the whole thing out of spite. None of it worked. The jury took 3 hours to convict Patricia Crawford of second-degree murder in Linda's death, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder in my case. When the judge read the sentence, I was sitting in the front row. Patricia Ann Crawford, you are hereby sentenced to 25 years to life in a state correctional facility. Patricia turned to look at me one final time. Her eyes were empty, hollow. The eyes of a woman who had finally run out of schemes. I hope you are happy, she mouthed. I was not happy, but I was free, and that was enough. David received 8 years as an accessory. He testified against his mother in exchange for a reduced sentence, finally breaking free of her control. Too little, too late. My divorce was finalized 3 weeks after the arrests. The proceedings took 11 minutes. David did not contest anything. He did not ask for a single penny. The inheritance remained my separate property, exactly as Grandma Ruth had intended. When I walked out of that courthouse, I stopped on the steps and looked up at the sky. It was a perfect spring day, blue sky, warm breeze, the kind of day that makes you believe the world might actually be a good place. I am free, I whispered. And for the first time in 9 years, I actually meant it. 6 months after my divorce was finalized, I stood on the porch of Grandma Ruth's cabin, watching the apple trees bloom. She had bought this property 30 years ago. A tiny cabin on 2 acres of lakefront land, surrounded by apple trees she had planted herself. Everyone thought she was crazy. A factory worker buying lakefront property? With what money? But Grandma Ruth had never cared what people thought. She had a vision, and she had patience. 30 years later, those apple trees were tall and strong. Their blossoms filled the air with the sweetest perfume I had ever smelled. And I finally understood what she had been trying to teach me all along. The best things in life take time. They take patience. They take faith in yourself when nobody else believes. She told me once that the best revenge is not success, it is peace. When you can sit quietly and watch the trees bloom without worrying about what anyone else thinks, she said. That is when you have really won. I understood now. I had spent so many years being afraid of Patricia's criticism, afraid of David's disappointment, afraid of rocking the boat, of being difficult, of being alone. I had made myself small so other people could feel big. I had silenced my own voice so other people would not be uncomfortable. I had given away pieces of myself, one by one, until there was almost nothing left. But being alone was not the worst thing that could happen. Being with the wrong people, that was worse. Losing yourself, that was worse. Forgetting your own worth, that was worse. Grandma Ruth knew that. She spent 40 years building a foundation for me, not just in real estate, but in wisdom. Her letter was not just a warning about David and Patricia. It was permission. Permission to leave, permission to stay, permission to choose my own life. I kept all 3 condos. I rent 2 of them out now, just like Grandma Ruth did, building wealth slowly and steadily. The tenants are good people, hardworking families, single mothers trying to make a better life for their children. The kind of people Grandma Ruth would have approved of. The 3rd one, the Northside condo, became my home. I renovated it myself. I tore down the walls David had chosen. I ripped out the carpet Patricia had picked. I painted the walls a soft sage green, the color of new leaves in spring. I hung photographs of Grandma Ruth in the living room, right where I could see her face every single day. I took the creative director job I had turned down 3 years ago, the position Patricia said would abandon the family, the opportunity David said I was not ready for. Turns out the only thing I abandoned was the people who were holding me back. My boss told me last week that I am up for a promotion, head of the design department. 23 people would report to me. 3 years ago, I would have said no. I would have said I was not qualified. I would have said someone else deserved it more. But I am done making myself small. Jess came to visit me at the cabin last weekend. We sat on the porch drinking wine, watching the sunset over the lake. The sky turned pink, then orange, then a deep purple that made the water look like liquid gold. "You know what I keep thinking about?" she said. "What? Those roses." I looked at her. "What roses?" "The ones you bought for David, the day you found out about the inheritance. You were so excited to tell him the good news, and you bought him flowers." I had almost forgotten about those roses. $24.99. I had been so happy that day, so naive, so full of hope for a future that was never going to exist. "Most expensive lesson of my life," I said. "Second most expensive," Jess corrected. "The first was the 9 years you wasted on him." I thought about that for a moment. 9 years, 3,285 days of loving a man who was planning to kill me. It should have made me angry. It should have filled me with regret, but it did not. "I do not regret those 9 years," I said slowly. "Not anymore." Jess looked at me like I was crazy. "They taught me things I needed to learn," I explained. "They showed me who I was when I stopped being myself. They showed me how far I would go to please other people, how much of myself I would sacrifice to avoid conflict. And they led me here, to this porch, to this peace, to this version of myself that I actually like." Jess smiled and raised her glass. "Two expensive lessons," she said. "Two expensive lessons," I agreed, "and to never repeating them." I got a letter from Amber last month. She had the baby, a little girl, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's blonde hair. "I thought you should know," she wrote. "Your grandmother saved both of us. If it was not for her letter, if she had not warned you, I would have married David after you were gone. I would have been next. My daughter would have been motherless. So I wanted to do something to honor her. I named my baby Ruth." I cried when I read that. Not from sadness, not from grief, from something else entirely, something that felt like completion. There is a quote I think about sometimes. I do not remember who said it, but the words stayed with me. "People will show you who they are. Believe them." David and Patricia showed me who they were that day in the kitchen when they thought I could not hear. They showed me their greed, their cruelty, their complete lack of love or loyalty. For 9 years, I had ignored the warning signs. I had made excuses. I had believed what I wanted to believe instead of what was right in front of my face. But when I finally saw the truth, I believed it. And that belief saved my life. Grandma Ruth showed me who she was too. In 40 years of quiet sacrifice, in worn-out dresses and split sandwiches, in a letter full of wisdom and love, in an inheritance that was never really about money. She showed me that I was worthy of freedom. She showed me that I was strong enough to fight. She showed me that I mattered, not because of what I could give to others, but because of who I was. And I finally believed her. Sometimes now when I am sitting on my porch or walking through my apartment or lying in my own bed in my own home, I talk to her. "Thank you, Grandma," I say. "Thank you for everything. Thank you for believing in me when I did not believe in myself. Thank you for giving me a choice when I thought I had none. Thank you for loving me enough to protect me, even from the grave." And I swear sometimes when the wind moves through the apple trees just right, when the blossoms dance in the sunlight and the lake sparkles like diamonds, I can hear her answer. "You are welcome, sweetheart. Now go live." So that is what I do. I live, I work. I laugh with Jess until my stomach hurts. I watch the trees bloom in spring and the leaves fall in autumn. I drink my coffee in peace, without criticism, without fear, without waiting for permission from anyone. I am 33 years old. I am divorced. I am alone. And I have never, ever been happier. Because I finally understand what my grandmother was trying to tell me. Freedom is not about money. It is not about property or property. It is not about success or revenge or proving anyone wrong. Freedom is knowing you have a choice. Freedom is belonging to yourself. Grandma Ruth lived poor so I could live free. And now, finally, I am. If this story touched your heart, Do not leave without dropping a comment below. Tell me, have you ever discovered someone's true colors when they thought you were not watching? Have you ever had a Grandma Ruth in your life? Someone who believed in you when no one else did? Share this story with someone who needs to hear that they deserve better. Share it with someone who is stuck in a situation they think they cannot escape. Share it and with every woman who has ever made herself small to keep the peace. And remember what Grandma Ruth taught us. People will show you who they are. Believe them. Now hit that subscribe button, because next week I have a story that will make this one look like a fairy tale. Until then, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.